I watched the unopened letter on our kitchen counter for 3 days before finally tearing into it. The expensive cream envelope with its embossed return address for Hartman and Associates had been taunting me each morning as I made coffee. I knew exactly what it contained: divorce papers from my husband of 12 years. The signs had been there for months: hushed phone calls, late nights at the office, and the gradual disappearance of warmth from Jason's eyes when he looked at me. When I finally slid my finger under the seal, my hands weren't even shaking. That surprised me. After everything I'd been through, the chemo, the radiation, the sleepless nights wondering if I'd see my children graduate, this felt almost anticlimactic. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Petition for dissolution of marriage, I murmured, scanning the formal language that effectively ended my relationship with Jason Parker. The irony wasn't lost on me after paying off his personal debts just 6 months ago, a combination of failed business ventures and the luxury car he claimed was essential for client meetings. He was filing for an equitable division of assets. I placed the papers down and reached for my coffee, letting the bitter liquid wash over my tongue as I stared out at our suburban neighborhood through the kitchen window. The house we'd bought when Noah was born, the one I'd fought so hard to keep during the worst of my treatment, now felt like it was slipping away too. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Claire, my best friend from law school and now a successful family attorney. Coffee today? I have news about the Richardson case, and you sounded stressed yesterday. I smiled for the first time in days. At least someone's life was going according to plan. When I married Jason Parker at 26, I was Emily Chen, fresh from passing the bar and eager to make my mark as a corporate lawyer. Jason had been dazzling charming at dinner parties, attentive in private, ambitious about his fledgling tech startup. You handle the legal side, I'll handle the innovation, he'd said. During our honeymoon in Napa Valley, raising a glass of champagne against the Mediterranean sunset, we'll be unstoppable. What he really meant, as I would learn over the years, was that I would handle everything while he chased startup dreams and gradually came to resent the very stability I provided. The pattern had been established early. I would sacrifice my career ambitions to support his, put my own dreams on hold to raise our children, and somehow always end up being the one who had to clean up the financial messes he created. I gathered the divorce papers and slipped them into my briefcase. My hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from anger. The timing was calculated, I realized. He'd waited until I was strong enough to handle the shock, but not long enough for me to fully recover emotionally. Classic Jason, always looking for the angle that would benefit him most while causing me the maximum amount of pain. The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs broke my thoughts. Izzy appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair a mess of tangles, still in her unicorn pajamas. At 7 years old, she had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong. "Morning, Mama," she said, climbing onto the stool beside me. "You look sad." I forced a smile and smoothed her hair. "Just tired, sweetheart. What do you want for breakfast?" "Pancakes," she announced, then peered at the papers I was hastily shoving back into my briefcase. "What's that?" "Just boring grown-up stuff," I said, my voice catching slightly. "How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her father has decided to abandon the family just as Mommy is getting better?" Noah stumbled into the kitchen next, all elbows and knees at 9 years old, already dressed for school but with his backpack dragging behind him. He looked more like Jason every day, the same dark hair, the same stubborn jawline, the same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. "Where's Dad?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and staring into it as if breakfast might materialize. "He had an early meeting," I lied smoothly. Jason had been having a lot of early meetings lately. "Cereal or eggs? Can I have both?" I laughed despite everything. "Sure, baby," as I moved around the kitchen, making breakfast and preparing lunch boxes. I felt the familiar rhythm of our morning routine. This was what I'd been fighting for during the darkest days of my treatment, not just my life, but these moments. The chaos of getting kids ready for school, the complaints about forgotten homework, the sticky kisses goodbye. Jason was giving this up voluntarily. I couldn't understand it. After dropping the kids at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a full 10 minutes, watching other parents hurry to their jobs, their lives, their normal Tuesday morning routines. I envied them their ordinary problems, their intact families, their certainty about what tomorrow would bring. My phone rang. startling me out of my reverie. Jason's name appeared on the screen. "Hi," I answered, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Hey, how are you feeling today? Any fatigue from yesterday's appointment?" Dr. Martinez had given me another clean bill of health just the day before my 3-month checkup, showing no signs of cancer returning. Jason had missed the appointment, claiming, "A client emergency." "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I'm meeting Claire for coffee." "Good, good. You need to get out more. See people." I've been thinking, we should probably talk soon. About us, about what happens next." My grip tightened on the phone. He was going to tell me about the divorce, probably spin it as a mutual decision made for the good of everyone involved. "Of course," I said. "Whenever you're ready. Maybe this weekend? When the kids are at your mom's." "Sure." "Jason? Yeah, I love you." The words came out before I could stop them, and I realized I meant them. Despite everything, despite whatever was coming, I still loved the man I'd married. I was grieving not just our marriage, but the person I'd thought he was. There was a pause. "I love you too, Em. We'll figure this out, okay?" After he hung up, I drove to meet Claire at our usual coffee shop downtown, the divorce papers burning a hole in my briefcase like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet admitted to witnessing. Claire Reynolds was already there when I arrived, her red hair pulled back in a neat bun, her sharp business suit making her look every inch the successful attorney she'd become. We'd been friends since our first year at law school, when we'd been assigned as study partners and discovered we both had a talent for dismantling opposing arguments and a shared love of terrible reality TV. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, as I slid into the booth across from her. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman recovering from cancer wants to hear." Claire's expression softened immediately. You know what I mean. What's wrong? And don't say nothing, I've known you for 15 years. I pulled out the divorce papers and slid them across the table. Claire's green eyes widened as she scanned the first page. "That absolute bastard," she whispered. "When did you get these?" 3 days ago. I've been afraid to read them properly." Claire flipped through the pages, her lawyer's mind already processing the legal implications. Her expression grew darker with each page she turned. "Emily, this is designed to hurt you as much as possible," she said finally. "Look at the timeline. He filed these papers exactly 30 days after your last oncology appointment, the one where Dr. Martinez gave you the all clear. He's been planning this for months." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected Jason's timing was cruel, but I hadn't realized it was calculated. "There's more," Claire continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I've been hesitant to tell you this, but given the circumstances." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. Jason, laughing at what looked like an expensive restaurant, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, blonde, and gazed at him with obvious adoration. "Rachel Summers," Claire said quietly. "She works at his company." "Emily, I'm so sorry." I stared at the photo, feeling strangely detached. Part of me had known, I realized. The late nights, the new cologne, the way he could barely look at me during the worst of my treatment. While I was fighting for my life, he was already planning his exit strategy. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know for sure. The photo was taken 2 weeks ago," but Claire hesitated. "My source at Jason's company says they've been seen together for months." I set down my coffee cup carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. "During my treatment, Emily, during my treatment," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "While I was sick, while I was scared, while I was wondering if I'd live to see my children grow up, he was with her." Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know this is devastating, but we need to focus on protecting you and the kids now. This divorce, it's not going to be friendly." Jason's representation, Cindy Fisher, is known for being ruthless. I looked at my best friend, this woman who'd stood by me through law school, through my wedding, through sleepless nights when the kids were babies, through every chemo session when Jason was too busy to attend. "Then we need to be ruthless too," I said quietly. Claire smiled, the sharp, predatory smile that had made her one of the most feared family lawyers in the state. "Now you're talking like the woman who graduated top 10% of our class. Tell me everything, Em. Every asset, every account, every investment. If Jason wants to play hardball, we'll show him what hardball really looks like." For the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than devastation. I felt anger, yes, but also something else, determination. Jason had made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me, assuming that cancer had made me weak, that grief would make me pliable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I want to hire a private investigator, I said suddenly. Already on it, Claire replied, pulling out a business card. Marcus Webb, former police detective, completely discreet, and very good at finding things people don't want found. You think there's more? Emily, in my experience, when someone is brazen enough to file for divorce 30 days after their spouse gets cancer clearance while they're having an affair, there's always more. The private investigator's name was Marcus Webb, and he looked exactly like what central casting would order for the role: graying temples, weathered face, and eyes that had seen too much of human nature's darker side. Claire had recommended him, and within a week of our coffee shop meeting, he had enough evidence to bury Jason's reputation permanently. Your husband isn't very careful, Marcus said, sliding a manila envelope across Claire's conference table. Either he wants to get caught, or he thinks you're too naive to notice. Given what you've told me about his personality, I'm betting on the latter. I opened the envelope with steady hands, though my heart was racing. Inside were dozens of photographs: Jason and Rachel at restaurants I recognized as expensive, entering hotels, walking hand in hand through Riverside Park where he used to take the kids on weekend mornings. In one particularly damning shot, they were kissing outside what looked like a luxury apartment building. That's her place, Marcus explained. Luxury complex on the Upper East Side. Rents about $4,200 a month, which is interesting because according to her tax records and salary information, she shouldn't be able to afford it. Claire leaned forward, her legal mind already processing implications. You think Jason's paying for it? I think Jason's paying for a lot of things. This woman has expensive tastes, and her lifestyle doesn't match her reported income from his company. Marcus pulled out another folder. But that's not the most interesting part. He spread several financial documents across the table: bank statements, credit card bills, and what looked like property records. Your husband has been very busy preparing for this divorce, Marcus continued. 3 months ago, he opened 2 private accounts and began transferring money from your joint accounts. Small amounts at first: $500 here, $800 there, but it's added up to nearly $73,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. 73,000? That's just what I could trace through traditional banking. There might be more in cryptocurrency or offshore accounts. He's also been liquidating some investments without your knowledge, technically legal since they were in his name, but ethically questionable given that the initial money came from your joint assets. Claire was taking notes furiously, her pen scratching across legal paper with the intensity of someone building a case. What about the timeline of the affair? She asked. Marcus consulted his files. Based on what I could document, at least 10 months, but I suspect it goes back further, possibly to when Emily's treatment began. The earliest photo I could find was taken outside his office building 13 months ago. The room fell silent. I stared at the photographs, at Jason's smiling face as he played the role of devoted boyfriend with another woman. 13 months ago, I'd just been diagnosed. I'd been terrified, confused, desperately needing his support, and he'd been planning his escape. There's something else, Marcus continued quietly. I followed him yesterday afternoon. He took Rachel to look at houses, expensive ones in Westchester, about 20 minutes from your current neighborhood. That broke something inside me. The betrayal was one thing I could almost understand: Jason's inability to handle my illness, his need to escape into someone else's arms. People react to trauma differently, and not everyone has the strength to face cancer head-on. But planning a life with her in our children's vicinity, planning to replace me not just as his wife but as a fixture in Noah and Izzy's daily environment, that was unforgivable. I want to confront him, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Claire shook her head immediately. Not yet. We need to be strategic about this. If we reveal what we know too early, he'll have time to hide more assets or create a better narrative for court. I don't care about strategy, Claire. I care about my children seeing their father parade another woman around like she's their new stepmother. Emily, Claire's voice carried the firm but gentle tone she used with difficult clients. I understand your anger. I really do. But if you want to win this, if you want to protect your kids and your financial future, you need to let me handle this legally first. Trust me. I looked at the photographs again, at Jason's face bright with happiness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. What's the plan? First, We gather everything. Marcus, I want a complete financial picture, every account, every investment, every asset Jason has touched in the past 2 years. Emily, I need you to go through your home office and copy every document you can find. Bank statements, tax returns, business records, insurance policies, everything. What if Jason notices? He won't, Marcus interjected. He's too busy playing house with his girlfriend to pay attention to what you're doing. That's his second major mistake. What was his first? Claire smiled grimly. Underestimating you. That evening, I sat in Jason's home office while he was at another client dinner, methodically photographing every document I could find. The kids were upstairs doing homework, and the house was quiet except for the soft clicks of my phone camera and the occasional creak of the old colonial settling around us. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Jason hadn't just been hiding money, he'd been actively planning this divorce for months, possibly since my diagnosis. There were printouts of apartment listings in Manhattan, research on custody laws in New York State, even a consultation agreement with Cindy Fisher dated 8 weeks before I received the divorce papers. He'd planned this while I was still weak. From my final rounds of treatment, while I was celebrating being cancer-free, while I was dreaming about our future together as a family that had survived the worst life could throw at us. But there was more. Hidden in a folder marked business development were documents that made my blood run cold. Jason had been borrowing against his company's assets to fund his lifestyle with Rachel, the apartment, the expensive dinners, even what appeared to be a vacation to the Bahamas I'd never known about. He wasn't just betraying me. He was potentially destroying his business and the livelihoods of his employees. My phone rang, startling me out of my focused documentation. Jason's name appeared on the screen. Hi, I answered, proud of how normal my voice sounded despite my racing heart. Hey, how are you feeling tonight? Any fatigue from your day with the kids? I could hear restaurant noise in the background, but also something else, a woman's laugh. Rachel's laugh, I realized with sick certainty. I'm fine, I said. Just catching up on some reading. How's the dinner going? Good, good. This client is really interested in expanding our social media presence. Could be a big contract. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. I wondered how many others there had been, how many fictional clients and invented emergencies had covered his meetings with Rachel. That's wonderful, I said. We could use the security. Actually, I've been thinking, we should probably talk this weekend about us, about what happens next with our situation. As if my cancer, our marriage, our children's futures were just another business problem to be managed. Of course, I said. Whenever you're ready, Jason. Maybe Saturday afternoon? When the kids are at your mom's for their sleepover. Sure. Should I cook dinner? There was a pause, and I could almost hear him calculating how to handle this conversation with minimum drama and maximum advantage for himself. Maybe we should just order takeout. Keep it simple. Whatever you prefer. Yes? I know this is hard, but we'll figure out what's best for everyone, okay? After he hung up, I sat in his chair and cried for the first time since receiving the divorce papers. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the harsh, angry sobs of someone who'd been betrayed by the person they trusted most in the world. When I was finished, I dried my eyes and got back to work. If Jason wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules better than he knew them himself. If he wanted to destroy our family, he'd discover what it felt like to lose everything he'd taken for granted. I'd spent months fighting cancer, an enemy I couldn't see, couldn't reason with, couldn't negotiate with. Fighting Jason would be easier. At least I knew he was the enemy now. Claire's office occupied an entire floor of a sleek downtown building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the Manhattan skyline. When I arrived for our strategy meeting the following Monday morning, she had transformed her conference room into what looked like a military command center. Documents spread across every surface, whiteboards covered with financial calculations and timelines, and multiple laptops displaying various legal databases and financial tracking software. Impressive, I said, taking in the organized chaos. You've been busy. We've been busy, Claire corrected, gesturing to a young woman with short dark hair and intense brown eyes who was typing furiously at one of the laptops. Emily, meet Sarah Kim, our forensic accountant. Sarah, this is Emily Parker, the client I told you about. Sarah looked up and offered a brief smile. I've been diving deep into your husband's finances for the past 48 hours. Let's just say he's been very creative with his bookkeeping, and not in a good way. I sat down at the conference table, feeling oddly calm despite the magnitude of what we were about to discuss. Over the weekend, after photographing Jason's documents and processing the reality of his calculated betrayal, I'd reached a strange place of acceptance. My marriage was over, had been over for months apparently, while I was too sick and trusting to notice. Now it was just a matter of protecting my children and building a foundation for our future. Let's start with the asset overview, Claire said, pulling up a presentation on the main screen. Your joint assets include the house, currently valued at approximately $650,000, with about $340,000 remaining on the mortgage. 2 vehicles, your SUV and Jason's BMW, and various investment accounts totaling about $180,000. Your separate assets include the inheritance from your father, which you wisely kept in a separate account, and your $401,000 from your law firm days, which is substantial. What about Jason's business? Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. That's where things get complicated. On paper, Jason's company, Parker Digital Solutions, is worth approximately $400,000 based on client contracts and projected revenue. But in reality, the company is in serious financial trouble. What kind of trouble? According to the documents you photographed and the additional research I've done, the company has been operating at a loss for the past 8 months. They're behind on several major client deliverables, facing potential lawsuits for missed deadlines, and Jason has been borrowing against the company's assets to maintain his lifestyle. Claire nodded grimly. Including his lifestyle with Rachel. Sarah found evidence that he's been using company credit lines to pay for her apartment, their trips, and various other expenses that have nothing to do with business operations. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. How much are we talking about? Sarah consulted her notes. Conservatively, about $6,000 per month for the past 10 months. That's $60,000 in company funds used for personal expenses, which is not only unethical but potentially illegal depending on how the company is structured and what his partners agreed to. His partners don't know? Based on the financial records, I'd say definitely not. Jason has been very careful to categorize these expenses as client development and marketing initiatives, but the paper trail tells a different story. Claire moved to the whiteboard where she'd outlined our strategy. This gives us significant leverage. Our 3 primary goals are: first, secure primary custody of Noah and Izzy. Second, protect your financial assets, including keeping the house. Third, ensure adequate child support and spousal maintenance. What about exposing Jason's business practices? That's our nuclear option, Claire explained. If Jason tries to play hardball or refuses to negotiate reasonably, we can threaten to expose his misappropriation of company funds. His business partners and potential clients won't appreciate learning that he's been using their money to support his mistress. And Rachel? Sarah pulled up another screen. Rachel Summers is about to discover that having an affair with a married man comes with consequences. She's been living well above her means the apartment Jason pays for costs more than her entire annual salary after taxes. If this goes public, she'll not only lose her lifestyle but potentially her job and her professional reputation. I thought about the photographs Marcus had shown me, about Jason's happiness with this woman who had no idea what it felt like to hold your children while they asked why daddy didn't want to live with them anymore. I don't want to destroy her out of spite, I said carefully, but I also won't let her impact my children's lives or financial security. Claire nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right approach. Courts respond well to parents who prioritize their children's welfare over personal vendettas. It also makes you look reasonable and mature compared to Jason's behavior. What's our timeline? We file our response to Jason's petition today, along with a counter-petition that includes our demands. We also request an immediate accounting of all marital assets and a temporary restraining order preventing Jason from disposing of any major assets without court approval. Will that work? It'll certainly get his attention, and more importantly, it'll get Cindy Fisher's attention. She's good, but she's used to dealing with clients who have clean hands. Jason's situation is messier than her usual cases. Sarah looked up from her laptop. There's one more thing you should know. I found evidence that Jason has been researching divorce attorneys for months, not just Cindy Fisher, but several others. He's been shopping around, probably looking for someone who would help him hide assets or create the most favorable narrative. Meaning this wasn't a sudden decision prompted by your recovery or any marital problems. This was a calculated plan that he's been working on since at least your second month of treatment. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. While I was fighting for my life, terrified I might not see my children grow up, Jason was already planning his exit strategy and researching how to minimize his financial obligations to us. I want to be prepared for every possibility, I said finally. What's the worst case scenario? Claire sat down across from me. Worst case? Jason fights for joint custody to reduce his support obligations, successfully hides enough assets to minimize the settlement, and drags this out for months while bleeding you dry with legal fees. And best case, we present such a compelling case of his financial misconduct and moral failures that he agrees to a settlement that gives you primary custody, the house, adequate support, and a fair division of the legitimate assets. What do you think is most likely? Sarah and Claire exchanged a look. Honestly, Claire said, I think Jason is going to try to bully you into accepting less than you deserve, banking on the fact that you're emotionally vulnerable and financially dependent on him. When that doesn't work, he'll try to drag things out, hoping you'll get tired of fighting. He doesn't know me very well anymore, does he? Claire smiled, the same sharp, confident expression that had made her legendary in family court. No, he doesn't. The Jason I've been researching is used to dealing with the Emily who put his needs first, who sacrificed her career for his, who cleaned up his messes without complaint. He has no idea how to handle the Emily who survived cancer and isn't afraid of a fight. What's our first move? We serve him with papers today. Tomorrow, we start gathering depositions from his business partners, his employees, and anyone else who can testify to his character and behavior. We also schedule a forensic accounting of all business and personal assets. How long will this take? If Jason is smart and negotiates reasonably, 3 to 6 months. If he wants to fight, Claire shrugged. Could be a year or more. I thought about Noah and Izzy, about the stability they needed, about the home they deserve to keep. I thought about Jason's betrayal, about the months of lies, about the cold calculation behind his timing. Then we'd better make sure he understands that fighting us will cost him more than cooperating, I said. Sarah grinned. Now you're thinking like someone who's going to win. As I left Claire's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not hope that my marriage could be saved, but hope that I could build something better from its ashes. Hope that my children would see their mother as someone who fought for them, who didn't just accept betrayal and abandonment as the price of peace. Jason had made a fundamental mistake in his calculations. He'd assumed that cancer had made me weak, that I'd be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity and financial security he was willing to throw my way. Instead, cancer had taught me what really mattered and what I was willing to fight for. He was about to get a very expensive education in just how strong a woman could be when she had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after we'd served Jason with our counter petition. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with Marcus Webb's number. Emily, we need to meet today, Marcus said without preamble. I found something that changes everything. Within an hour, I was sitting in Claire's office again, this time with both Marcus and Sarah present. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast long shadows across the conference table, where Marcus had spread out what looked like bank statements, photographs, and printed emails. Tell me you're sitting down, Marcus began, because what I'm about to show you is going to make you very angry. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never seen before, one opened in Jason's name alone, but with a very familiar address. This account was opened 14 months ago, Marcus explained. The same week you received your cancer diagnosis. I stared at the statements, watching the deposits and withdrawals that told a story I wasn't prepared to hear. Regular transfers from our joint accounts, business account transfers, and something else, large deposits that didn't match any income source I knew about. Where is this money coming from? I asked. Sarah leaned forward, her laptop open to what appeared to be Jason's business banking records. That's where it gets interesting. Your husband has been invoice padding his clients for months. He bills them for services that were never performed, or inflates the cost of services that were completed, then pockets the difference. That's fraud. That's exactly what it is, Claire said grimly. And it gets worse. Show her the other thing, Marcus. Marcus pulled out another set of photographs. These weren't of Jason and Rachel at restaurants or hotels. These were screenshots of text messages, emails, and what appeared to be planning documents. I was able to access some deleted files from Jason's laptop, Marcus said. Emily, your husband has been planning this divorce since your second month of treatment, but the timeline isn't what we thought. He spread out printed emails between Jason and someone named David Reinhardt, who appeared to be some kind of financial advisor. Read this one, Marcus said, pointing to an email dated 8 months ago. I read aloud. David, Emily's treatment is going better than expected, which means I need to accelerate our timeline. She's going to recover, and when she does, she'll want to get back into practicing law. We need to have everything in place before she's strong enough to fight back. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jason hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been actively hoping my cancer treatment would leave me too weak to protect myself and our children. There's more, Marcus continued. Jason took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, a substantial one. Claire's head snapped up. How substantial? $1.2 million. The room fell silent. I felt as if the floor had dropped out from under me. He was betting on me dying. I whispered. It gets worse, Sarah said quietly. According to the financial records, Jason has been moving money offshore. There's at least $300,000 in accounts in the Cayman Islands that he's never disclosed. Claire was already reaching for her phone. This changes everything. Emily, we're not just dealing with adultery and hidden assets anymore. We're looking at fraud, potential insurance fraud, and possible murder. I finished the sentence she couldn't. Let's not jump to conclusions, Marcus said carefully. But the life insurance policy combined with the accelerated timeline when your treatment started showing success, it raises questions. I thought about the months when Jason had been so solicitous about my medications, always offering to pick up my prescriptions, always asking about my doctor's appointments. I thought about the times I'd felt unusually tired after meals he'd prepared, the way he'd encouraged me to rest more even when I was feeling stronger. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I need to see my medical records, I said suddenly. Why? Claire asked. Because there were times during treatment when I felt sicker than I should have. Times when my blood work didn't match how I was feeling. I want to make sure. I couldn't finish the sentence. Claire nodded grimly. We'll subpoena your complete medical records and have them reviewed by an independent oncologist. If there's any evidence of tampering or interference with your treatment, how could I have been so blind? I asked, staring at the evidence spread across the table. You were fighting for your life, Marcus said gently. You trusted the person who was supposed to be fighting alongside you. That's not blindness, Emily. That's love. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jason's name appeared on the screen. Can we move our talk to tonight? Something important came up at work. I showed the message to Claire, who smiled coldly. Perfect timing. Marcus, how quickly can we get additional surveillance in place? Already done. I've been monitoring his communications since yesterday. Jason and Rachel are planning to leave town this weekend. Leave town? Sarah pulled up another screen on her laptop. Flight reservations to the Cayman Islands. 2 tickets, departing Saturday morning. The implications hit me immediately. He's going to empty the offshore accounts, not if we stop him. First, Claire said, already dialing her phone. Judge Harrison? It's Claire Reynolds. I need an emergency hearing for a restraining order. While Claire worked to freeze Jason's assets and prevent him from leaving the country, I sat staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal. It was so much worse than an affair. He'd been systematically planning my destruction, possibly even my death. While I fought the hardest battle of my life, Emily, Marcus said quietly, there's one more thing you need to know. He pulled out a final folder. Inside were photographs of Rachel, but not with Jason. She was meeting with a man I didn't recognize, in what appeared to be a lawyer's office. Rachel has been consulting with her own attorney, Marcus explained. She's preparing to testify against Jason. What? According to my sources, Rachel found out about the life insurance policy and the offshore accounts 3 weeks ago. She's been building her own case, probably planning to expose Jason to protect herself. Claire finished her phone call and turned back to us. Emergency hearing is set for tomorrow morning. We'll get a restraining order preventing Jason from traveling and freezing all accounts pending investigation. Emily, you need to be prepared for this to get very ugly very quickly. How ugly? Criminal charges ugly. If we can prove Jason was tampering with your treatment or planning insurance fraud, we're not just talking about divorce court anymore. We're talking about the district attorney's office. I thought about Noah and Izzy, about what this would mean for them. Their father wasn't just leaving them, he was potentially a criminal who had put their mother's life at risk. What do I tell the children? Nothing yet, Claire said firmly. We need to be absolutely certain about our facts before we involve them in this. But Emily, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Jason might be arrested. Good, I said, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. If he did what we think he did, he deserves whatever consequences he faces. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the divorce papers Jason had originally served me, reading them with new eyes. Every clause, every demand, every seemingly reasonable request now looked different knowing what I knew about his true intentions. He'd been planning to take everything, my children, my assets, possibly even my life, while positioning himself as the victim of a wife who couldn't handle the pressures of marriage after surviving cancer. My phone rang. Jason's name appeared on the screen. Hi, I answered, proud of how normal my voice sounded despite everything. Hey, about tonight, something's come up. Can we postpone until Saturday? Of course, I said. Is everything okay? Just some business issues I need to handle. Nothing for you to worry about. Business issues. He was probably making final arrangements for the Cayman Islands trip, not knowing that we were already 10 steps ahead of him. I love you, Jason, I said, meaning it as both a goodbye and a challenge. There was a long pause. I love you too, Em. After he hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room where we'd brought both our children home from the hospital, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and what I'd thought were happy anniversaries. Tomorrow, I would watch my husband's life implode as the full extent of his betrayal became public. I would see him arrested, possibly, and face the reality that the man I'd loved for 12 years had been willing to let me die to secure his own financial future. But tonight, I was just a woman who had survived cancer and was about to survive something even worse, the discovery that the person she trusted most in the world had been her enemy all along. I was stronger than Jason had ever given me credit for. Tomorrow, he would learn exactly how strong. The emergency hearing took place in Judge Harrison's chambers at a.m. sharp, before the regular court calendar began. I sat beside Claire at a polished mahogany table, facing Jason and Cindy Fisher across the narrow room. Jason looked haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. He hadn't looked at me once since entering the room. Judge Harrison, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense, reviewed our emergency motion while we waited in tense silence. Miss Reynolds, she said finally, these are serious allegations. You're claiming that Mr. Parker has hidden assets, committed fraud, and, she paused, looking over her reading glasses, potentially interfered with his wife's medical treatment? Yes, Your Honor, we have substantial evidence of financial misconduct, and we believe Mr. Parker was planning to leave the country this weekend to access offshore accounts. Cindy Fisher leaned forward. Your Honor, these allegations are preposterous. Mr. Parker is a successful businessman who, Miss Fisher, Judge Harrison interrupted. I'll hear from your client in a moment. Miss Reynolds, present your evidence. Claire methodically laid out our case. The hidden accounts, the fraudulent business practices, the life insurance policy, the planned trip to the Cayman Islands. With each piece of evidence, I watched Jason's facade crumble a little more when she presented the emails detailing his timeline for the divorce, timed to coincide with my cancer treatment. Even Cindy Fisher looked shocked. Your Honor, Claire concluded, we're asking for an immediate asset freeze, surrender of Mr. Parker's passport, and emergency temporary custody of the minor children pending a full investigation. Judge Harrison turned to Jason. Mr. Parker, these are very serious accusations. How do you respond? Jason stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly. Your Honor, some of these financial arrangements were made for legitimate business purposes. The timing of the divorce filing had nothing to do with my wife's illness, Mr. Parker, the judge interrupted. Did you or did you not take out a life insurance policy on your wife without her knowledge during her cancer treatment? Yes, but that was just financial planning. Did you or did not open accounts in the Cayman Islands without disclosing them to your wife? Jason's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he ignored her. Your Honor, I can explain, Mr. Parker. On the advice of your counsel, I suggest you stop talking. Judge Harrison's voice was ice cold. Miss Fisher, I hope you're advising your client about his Fifth Amendment rights, because some of what I'm hearing here might interest the district attorney. Cindy Fisher looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client. Denied. Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting the emergency restraining order. All assets are frozen pending investigation. Mr. Parker, you will surrender your passport to the court clerk immediately. As for temporary custody, Judge Harrison looked directly at me for the first time. Mrs. Parker, are you prepared to assume full temporary custody of your children? Yes, Your Honor. Then temporary custody is awarded to Mrs. Parker. Mr. Parker, we'll have supervised visitation only pending resolution of these allegations. She banged her gavel. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a full hearing. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Cindy Fisher's voice echoing down the hallway as she spoke urgently to Jason. Claire squeezed my arm. Phase 1 complete, she said. How are you feeling? Like I'm going to be sick, I admitted, but also relieved. It's finally out in the open. The real battle starts now, Emily. Jason's going to fight this with everything he has. She was right. Over the next week, Jason launched a desperate campaign to salvage his reputation and his freedom. He hired a crisis management firm to control the narrative, claiming that I was a vindictive ex-wife using false allegations to punish him for wanting a divorce. But the evidence was too strong, and more kept emerging. Marcus discovered that Jason had been forging client signatures on inflated invoices. Sarah found additional hidden accounts. Most damaging of all, my medical records review revealed unexplained anomalies in my blood work during treatment times when my levels suggested I should have been much sicker than I felt, and times when I felt worse than my levels indicated. Dr. Martinez, my oncologist, was horrified when I met with him privately. Emily, some of these fluctuations are consistent with someone interfering with your medications, he said, his face grave. If someone was giving you additional doses of your anti-nausea medication, it could cause the blood work abnormalities we're seeing. Or if someone was diluting your supplements, could it have affected my recovery? Potentially. It could have prolonged your treatment, made you sicker than necessary, or in a worst-case scenario. He didn't finish the sentence. Could it have killed me? Let's just say that interfering with a cancer patient's treatment plan is extremely dangerous. Armed with this evidence, Claire filed additional charges. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation. Jason's business partners, finally learning the truth about their company's finances, fired him and filed their own lawsuit. But the hardest part was yet to come, telling Noah and Izzy. I waited until a quiet Sunday afternoon when they were both home, curled up with me on the living room couch. We'd been together constantly since the emergency hearing, and I could see they were starting to ask questions about why Daddy wasn't living with us anymore. Kids, I said gently, I need to talk to you about Daddy. 9-year-old Noah looked up from his book, his dark eyes so much like Jason's that it made my heart ache. 7-year-old Izzy abandoned her coloring and climbed into my lap. Is Daddy coming home? Izzy asked. No, sweetheart. Daddy and I are getting divorced, which means we won't be married anymore and he won't live with us. Why? Noah demanded, his voice angry. Did you make him leave? The question cut deep, but I'd been prepared for it. No, baby. Daddy made some choices that hurt our family. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that can't be fixed. What kind of mistakes? Noah was old enough to want real answers. I chose my words carefully. Daddy took money that belonged to our family and gave it to someone else. He also lied to me about important things. When people in a family lie to each other and take things that don't belong to them, it breaks the trust that families need to stay together. Is Daddy a bad person? Izzy asked, her voice small. Daddy is a person who made very bad choices, I said, holding her closer. But he's still your father, and he still loves you. This isn't about you, it's about problems between Daddy and me. Will we still see him? Noah asked. Yes, but not as much as before. A judge will decide when and how you can visit with Daddy. I don't want to see him, Noah said suddenly, his voice fierce. If he hurt you, I don't want to see him. Oh, sweetheart, I said, reaching for him. I know you're angry, and that's okay. But Daddy is still your father, and you might feel differently later. Right now, you don't have to worry about visiting him if you don't want to. What about our house? Izzy asked. Do we have to move? No, baby. This is our home, and we're staying here. Nothing about your daily life is going to change except that Daddy won't be living with us. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in my bedroom looking through photo albums from our marriage. The happy memories felt tainted now, knowing what I knew about Jason's true character. But I couldn't let his betrayal poison everything. Noah and Izzy deserved to have some untarnished memories of their father. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Rachel is meeting with prosecutors tomorrow. Her testimony could be the final nail in Jason's coffin. I set the phone aside and continued looking through the photos. In one, taken just after Izzy was born, Jason was holding her with such tenderness that I'd believed he would always protect our family. In another, from Noah's first day of school, we looked like the perfect suburban family. The man in those photos felt like a stranger now. But tomorrow, Rachel would tell prosecutors what she knew about Jason's plans, about the offshore accounts, about the conversations she'd overheard about life insurance and medical interference. Tomorrow, the last pieces of Jason's elaborate deception would come to light. I closed the photo album and got ready for bed. In the morning, I would face whatever new revelations emerged. I would protect my children from the worst of it while helping them understand that their father's choices didn't reflect on their worth or their future. Jason had planned for me to be weak, vulnerable, possibly even dead. Instead, I was stronger than I'd ever been, armed with the truth and fighting for the two most important people in my life. He'd made one final miscalculation. He'd underestimated a mother's love and a survivor's determination. The custody battle was just beginning, but I'd already won the most important victory. I was alive, I was strong, and I was ready for whatever came next. Rachel Summers walked into the district attorney's office on a crisp Monday morning wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a briefcase that would destroy what remained of Jason's carefully constructed lies. I wasn't there to witness her testimony, but Claire called me the moment the meeting concluded. She gave them everything, Claire said, her voice crackling with excitement through my phone. Bank records, audio recordings of conversations with Jason, even emails where he explicitly discussed the life insurance money and how long he thought your treatment would take. I was sitting in my car outside Noah's school, having just dropped him off for what had become our new normal routine. The past 2 weeks since the emergency hearing had been a careful balance of maintaining stability for the children while watching Jason's world implode in slow motion. Audio recordings? Apparently Rachel has been recording their conversations for months. She suspected Jason was lying to her about his finances and wanted protection. She never imagined she was documenting potential attempted murder. The words still felt surreal. Attempted murder. The man who had held my hand during our wedding vows, who had cried when each of our children was born, who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, that same man had apparently been trying to ensure my sickness became permanent. What happens now? The DA's office is considering formal charges. At minimum, Jason's looking at fraud, embezzlement, and interference with medical treatment. At worst, Claire paused. Emily, attempted murder charges are on the table. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the headrest. Part of me felt vindicated finally. Someone in authority was acknowledging the full scope of what Jason had done. But another part of me felt terrified for my children, who would have to live with the knowledge that their father had tried to kill their mother. There's something else, Claire continued. Jason called my office this morning. He wants to meet with you. He says he has a proposal that could resolve everything without a trial. I almost laughed. Even facing potential prison time, Jason was still trying to negotiate, still believing he could charm or manipulate his way out of the consequences of his actions. What did you tell him? That I'd discuss it with you. Emily, I have to advise you that meeting with Jason right now could be risky. His behavior has been increasingly erratic since the restraining order was put in place. Erratic how? He's been calling his former business partners, trying to convince them not to cooperate with the investigation. He's been showing up at places where he knows Rachel will be, despite being told to stay away from her. Yesterday, he was arrested for trespassing when he tried to enter your old law firm's building. Apparently, he was trying to access records from your time there. The image of Jason, desperate and unhinged, trying to break into my former workplace was both pathetic and frightening. This wasn't the controlled, calculating man who had orchestrated months of deception. This was someone whose careful plans had fallen apart, leaving him grasping at anything that might save him. I want to meet with him, I said. Emily, I want to hear what he has to say, but I want the meeting recorded, and I want it to happen in your office with you present. Are you sure? I thought about the children, about the questions they would have as they grew older, about the closure I might need to move forward completely. I'm sure. Set it up for this afternoon. Jason arrived at Claire's office at p.m., flanked by a new lawyer. Cindy Fisher had apparently dropped him as a client once the criminal charges became likely. His replacement was a younger man named David Morrison who looked nervous and kept checking his phone as if hoping for an escape from this particular case. Jason himself looked like he'd aged a decade in the past month. His hair was unkempt, his expensive clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the weight of his collapsing world. When he saw me sitting across the conference table, his facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something that might have been regret. Then the mask slipped back into place, and he became the Jason I now recognized, the manipulator, the liar, the man who had been willing to sacrifice everything and everyone for his own desires. Emily, he said, his voice softer than I'd expected. Thank you for agreeing to see me. What do you want, Jason? He glanced at his lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. I want to make this right, Jason said. I know I've made mistakes, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. You call systematically planning my death a mistake? That's not what happened, Jason said quickly. Emily, you have to believe me. I never wanted you to die. The life insurance policy was just financial planning, and the medical interference. Rachel misunderstood what she heard. So Rachel is lying? She's angry that our relationship is over. She's saying things to hurt me. I stared at my husband's soon-to-be ex-husband and marveled at his ability to lie even when faced with overwhelming evidence. Even now, cornered and desperate, he couldn't admit the truth about what he'd done. What's your proposal, Jason? David Morrison leaned forward, consulting his notes. Mr. Parker is prepared to offer a settlement that would give you primary custody of the children, the house, and 70% of all marital assets. In exchange, you would agree not to cooperate with any criminal investigation and to sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing the details of your marriage publicly. The offer was more generous than anything Jason had proposed during our initial divorce proceedings, but the conditions revealed his true priorities. He wasn't trying to make amends, he was trying to buy his freedom. And if I refuse? Jason leaned forward, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old Jason, the one who had convinced me to give up my career, to trust him with our finances, to believe his lies for so many years. Emily, think about Noah and Izzy. Do you really want them to grow up knowing their father is in prison? Do you want them to deal with the media attention, the shame, the questions from their classmates? I can give you everything you want financially, and we can all move on with our lives. You mean you can avoid the consequences of attempted murder, and I can pretend it never happened? I never tried to murder you, Jason said, his voice rising. Everything I did because I thought our marriage was over anyway. You were so sick, so distant during treatment. I didn't think you were going to make it, and I was trying to plan for that possibility. The words hung in the air like poison. Jason had just admitted that he'd given up on our marriage and my life during my darkest hours, when I needed him most. Claire, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting, looked up sharply. Mr. Parker, are you saying that you began planning for your wife's death because you assumed she wouldn't survive cancer treatment? David Morrison put his hand on Jason's arm, but Jason shook him off. I'm saying that I was realistic about her chances. Stage 3 cancer, aggressive treatment. The doctors weren't optimistic. My doctors were very optimistic, I said quietly. They gave me an 85% survival rate from the beginning. You knew that. The numbers don't tell the whole story, Jason. I leaned forward, looking directly into his eyes. Tell me the truth, just once. Did you interfere with my treatment, hoping I would die? The room fell silent. Jason stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to determine what answer would serve him best. No, he said finally. I would never want you to die, Emily. I loved you. Loved, past tense. I still care about you. about what happens to you and the kids, but not enough to avoid committing multiple felonies while I was fighting for my life. Jason's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The business was failing, we were drowning in debt, and you were so focused on your treatment that you couldn't see how everything was falling apart around us. I was trying to save our family's financial future by stealing money and planning my death, by making difficult decisions that you were too sick to make. The admission hung between us like a blade. Jason had just revealed his true feelings, that my illness had made me incompetent in his eyes, that he had the right to make unilateral decisions about our family's future, including decisions that put my life at risk. Claire cleared her throat. Mr. Morrison, I think we've heard enough. Emily, do you have a response to your husband's settlement offer? I looked at Jason one last time. This man who had shared my bed for 12 years, who had fathered my children, who had promised to protect me and instead had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. No, I said simply. No to which part? David Morrison asked. No to all of it. No settlement, no non-disclosure agreement, and I will absolutely cooperate with the criminal investigation. Jason, you made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. Jason's face went white. Emily, please. Think about the children. I am thinking about the children. I'm thinking about what kind of world I want them to grow up in. One where actions have consequences, where people are held accountable for their crimes, where mothers don't have to pretend their children's fathers didn't try to kill them. You're destroying our family. You destroyed our family the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. I stood up, gathering my purse and my dignity. Claire, I'll wait for you outside. As I reached the door, Jason called out one last time. Emily, you'll regret this. When the media circus starts, when the kids are getting harassed at school, when you're spending every penny you have on legal fees, you'll regret not taking this deal. I turned back to face him. Jason, the only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner, but better late than never. Outside Claire's office, I sat in my car and called Brian Davis, the family counselor who had been helping me prepare for these difficult conversations with the children. His calm, reassuring voice was exactly what I needed. How did it go? Brian asked. He still can't admit what he did. Even faced with recordings and evidence and the possibility of prison, he's still lying. How do you feel about that? Sad, I said, surprising myself. I feel sad that the man I loved never really existed, but also relieved. For months, I've been wondering if I was being too harsh, if I was misunderstanding his actions or motivations. Now I know for certain that I wasn't. And moving forward, I focus on protecting my children and building the life we deserve. Jason made his choices. Now I get to make mine. That evening, as I tucked Noah and Izzy into bed, Noah asked me a question that stopped me cold. Mom, is Dad really a bad person? I sat on the edge of his bed, looking at this beautiful boy who looked so much like his father, wondering how to answer honestly without destroying his ability to form healthy relationships in the future. Dad is a person who made very bad choices, I said carefully. Sometimes people do terrible things, but that doesn't necessarily make them terrible people. It just makes them people who need to face the consequences of what they've done. Will he go to jail? I don't know, baby. That's for other people to decide. I hope he does, Noah said fiercely. He hurt you. I understand why you feel that way, but I hope someday you'll be able to forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because holding on to anger hurts you more than it hurts him. Later that night, Claire called with an update. The DA's office has decided to proceed with charges, she said. Jason will be arrested tomorrow morning. Attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and interfering with medical treatment. His bail will probably be set pretty high. How long until trial? Probably 6 to 8 months, assuming he doesn't take a plea deal. Will he? Hard to say. Jason seems to believe he can talk his way out of anything, but his new lawyer knows the evidence against him is overwhelming. After hanging up, I walked through my house, truly my house now, with Jason's things gone, and his presence erased from every room. The children were sleeping safely upstairs. The bills were paid. The future, while uncertain, was entirely under my control. Tomorrow, Jason would be arrested for trying to kill me. Next month, our divorce would be finalized. Someday soon, I would have to help my children understand why their father was in prison. But tonight, I was simply a survivor of cancer, of betrayal, of a marriage that had nearly destroyed me. And for the first time in over a year, that felt like enough. The news of Jason's arrest broke at 6:47 a.m. when my phone started buzzing incessantly with calls from reporters who had somehow gotten my number. I let them all go to voicemail while I made breakfast for Noah and Izzy, determined to maintain some semblance of normal routine even as our world shifted dramatically. Local tech entrepreneur arrested on attempted murder charges. Read the headline. On the morning news, accompanied by footage of Jason being led away in handcuffs from his downtown apartment. I turned off the television before the children could see it, but I knew it was only a matter of time before this became impossible to shield them from completely. Claire arrived at my house at a.m., looking grim but determined. It's going to be a media circus for the next few days, she warned, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. Jason's arrest is big news. Successful businessman, attempted murder of cancer surviving wife, hidden offshore accounts. It has all the elements that make reporters salivate. What do I need to do? Nothing. Say nothing to any reporters. Don't answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize. And if anyone approaches you in public, refer them to my office. Our focus now is on the civil case, getting you the settlement you deserve and protecting the children's interests. She spread several documents across my kitchen table. Speaking of which, Jason's financial picture is even worse than we initially thought. The forensic accounting is complete, and it turns out he's been embezzling from his business partners for over 2 years, not just the past few months. I studied the reports, trying to make sense of the columns of numbers that represented my husband's systematic theft from everyone who had trusted him. How much? Total? Nearly $800,000. From the business, from your joint accounts, from client payments that he diverted to his personal use. The man was running a one-person crime spree. What does this mean for our divorce settlement? It means you're entitled to much more than we originally calculated. Jason's hidden assets, once recovered, will be substantial. Plus, given the criminal nature of his behavior, the court is likely to award you additional punitive damages. Sarah, our forensic accountant, arrived shortly after with more detailed breakdowns of Jason's financial crimes. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been living far beyond his means for years, using other people's money to maintain a lifestyle that was completely unsustainable. The offshore accounts contain approximately $3,400,000, Sarah explained, most of it traced back to client payments that were never delivered to the intended projects. There are also several domestic accounts that Jason opened using false identification, technically identity theft, which adds more charges to his growing list. False identification? He created a fake LLC using a slight variation of his name and social security number, then used that to open bank accounts and credit lines. It's actually quite sophisticated. He clearly put a lot of planning into this. Claire was making notes furiously. This actually helps us in several ways. First, it demonstrates premeditation for all his financial crimes. Second, it shows a pattern of deception that predates your cancer diagnosis, which undermines any claim that his behavior was driven by the stress of your illness. Third, it provides additional assets that can be recovered for you and the children. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately checked the message. Mrs. Parker, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your perspective on your husband's arrest and the charges he's facing. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I deleted the message and looked at Claire. How long will this media attention last? Probably until the trial. Jason's case has everything the media loves: wealth, betrayal, attempted murder, a sympathetic victim who survived cancer. I'm sorry, Emily, but you're going to be in the spotlight for a while. The reality of what lay ahead hit me suddenly. Months of media attention, a criminal trial where I would have to testify about the most painful period of my life, and all of it happening while I tried to help my children process their father's betrayal. I can handle it, I said, surprised by the certainty in my own voice. I survived cancer and Jason's attempts to kill me. I can survive some news coverage. That afternoon, while the children were at school, I met with Brian Davis to discuss how to help them cope with the inevitable media attention and their father's criminal charges. The most important thing is honesty appropriate to their ages, Brian explained. Noah is old enough to understand that his father broke serious laws and will face consequences. Izzy needs simpler explanations focused on her immediate safety and security. What about the media? They're going to see their father's arrest on television, hear about it from classmates. We prepare them for that. We give them simple, truthful responses they can use when people ask questions. And we make sure they know that none of this is their fault or their responsibility. I'm worried about Noah especially. He's been so angry at Jason, but he's also old enough to understand the implications of having a father in prison. Anger is a normal response to betrayal, and it's actually healthier than denial or self-blame. The important thing is helping him process that anger constructively, rather than letting it poison his ability to trust people in the future. That evening, I sat down with both children to prepare them for what was coming. You know that Daddy was arrested this morning, I began. We were gathered on the living room couch, the same place where I'd first told them about the divorce. Is he in jail? Izzy asked, her eyes wide. Right now, yes. But he might be able to come home while he waits for his trial, depending on what the judge decides. What's a trial? Izzy continued. It's where other people will decide if Daddy really did the bad things he's accused of doing. If they think he did, he'll have to go to jail for a longer time. Noah had been quiet, but now he looked up at me with those serious eyes that made him seem older than his 9 years. How long would he go to jail for? I'd been dreading this question, but I'd promised Brian I would be honest. I don't know for sure. It could be several years. Good, Noah said fiercely. He should go to jail for trying to hurt you. Noah, I understand why you feel that way, but I want you to remember that Daddy is still your father, and it's okay if you feel confused or sad about what's happening. I'm not confused, Noah said. I'm mad, and I don't want to see him. That's okay too. You don't have to see Daddy. If you don't want to. What about me? Izzy asked. Do I have to see him? No, sweetie. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. The most important thing is that you both feel safe and loved. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, I finally listened to the voicemails that had accumulated throughout the day. Reporters, old friends who had seen the news, my mother calling from Florida in a panic, and one message that made my blood run cold. Emily, this is Jason. I get one phone call, and I wanted to use it to tell you that this isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. The media attention, the trial, it's going to destroy our children's lives, and it's all your fault, even from jail, even facing years in prison. Jason was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me feel responsible for his choices. I called Claire immediately. He's not allowed to contact you directly, she said after I played her the message. I'll file a motion in the morning to have his phone privileges restricted. Emily, don't let him get in your head. This is exactly what he wants for you to feel guilty and responsible. I know, it's just, even now, he can't take responsibility for what he's done. Narcissists rarely can. But Emily, look at what you've accomplished. You've exposed his crimes, protected your children, and secured your financial future. You've turned a situation where you were meant to be the victim into one where you're clearly the victor. After hanging up, I walked through my house, checking the locks and security system that Claire had insisted I install. The physical threats were over. Jason was in jail, and even if he made bail, he was forbidden from coming near me or the children. But the emotional battle would continue for months. The trial, the media coverage, the challenge of helping my children understand and heal from their father's betrayal. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept the photo albums from our marriage. For months, these images had been painful, reminders of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. Tonight, they looked different. I could see now the signs I'd missed. The way Jason's smiles in later photos never quite reached his eyes. The way he held himself slightly apart from me and the children, as if he was already planning his escape. The gradual disappearance of genuine joy from his face as his double life became more complicated. I closed the albums and put them away. Someday, Noah and Izzy might want to see pictures of their father from happier times. But for now, I was focused on the future, on building a life for my children where they felt safe, loved, and valued. Jason had spent months planning my destruction. Instead, he had destroyed himself and handed me everything I needed to build something better from the ashes of our marriage. Tomorrow, I would start that building process in earnest. The trial began on a gray Monday morning in November, 6 months after Jason's arrest. I sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, wearing a navy blue suit that Claire had helped me select, professional, dignified, but not so formal as to seem calculated for sympathy. Behind me, the gallery was packed with reporters. Jason's former business partners, and what appeared to be a significant number of law students taking notes on what their professor had undoubtedly described as a fascinating case study in white-collar crime. Jason sat at the defendant's table with his legal team, which had grown to include a public relations consultant and what appeared to be a jury consultant. Even facing potential decades in prison, he was still trying to control the narrative, still believing that the right presentation could make people forget the evidence against him. He looked older than his 37 years, his hair graying at the temples and his expensive suit, unable to hide the weight he'd lost during his months in jail after being denied bail. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I'd never seen in Jason before: genuine fear. District Attorney Margaret Reyes delivered the opening statement for the prosecution, laying out Jason's crimes with methodical precision. The hidden accounts, the life insurance policy, the interference with my medical treatment, the systematic embezzlement from his business partners, each piece of evidence building toward an overwhelming picture of premeditated betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Reyes concluded, this is not a case about a marriage that fell apart or a man who made some poor financial decisions under stress. This is a case about attempted murder, about a man who saw his wife's cancer diagnosis as an opportunity to collect life insurance money while eliminating what he saw as an obstacle to his new life with his mistress. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Victoria Chen who had been hired with the last of Jason's remaining funds, painted a very different picture in her opening statement. My client is guilty of prejudgment, yes. Infidelity, yes. Even some questionable financial practices, driven by desperation as his business failed and his wife's medical bills mounted. But attempted murder? The prosecution would have you believe that Jason Parker, a man with no history of violence, suddenly decided to become a killer. The truth is much simpler. He was a man overwhelmed by circumstances who made bad decisions, but never decisions intended to harm his wife. I was scheduled to testify on the second day of the trial. Claire had prepared me extensively, running through potential questions and cross-examination scenarios, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of sitting in that witness box, facing Jason across the courtroom, and recounting the most painful period of my life for a room full of strangers. Reyes walked me through my testimony with gentle precision. My cancer diagnosis, the fear and uncertainty of treatment, Jason's growing distance during my illness, the discovery of his affair, and finally, the revelation of his financial crimes and the evidence suggesting he had interfered with my medical care. Mrs. Parker, Reyes said, can you describe your husband's behavior during your cancer treatment? He was absent, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Not just physically, though he missed most of my appointments and treatments. He was emotionally absent. During the worst days of chemotherapy, when I needed his support most, he was unavailable at work, on business trips, or simply not interested in dealing with my illness. Did you find this behavior unusual? Yes, Jason had always been attentive. Before my diagnosis, the change was dramatic and unexplained. When did you first suspect that your husband was having an affair? I didn't suspect anything specific until much later. I assumed his distance was his way of coping with the stress of my illness. I blamed myself for not being strong enough to support him emotionally while I was fighting cancer. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. Victoria Chen tried to portray me as a bitter ex-wife exaggerating Jason's crimes for revenge, but the evidence was too overwhelming and my testimony too consistent. Mrs. Parker, Chen said, isn't it true that you hired a private investigator to spy on your husband? I hired an investigator to determine the truth about my husband's behavior and our financial situation. Yes, because you suspected he was having an affair? Because our joint bank accounts were missing money and my husband was lying to me about where he was spending his time. And when you discovered the affair, you decided to punish him by making these outrageous criminal allegations. I decided to protect myself and my children by uncovering the truth about what my husband had been doing while I was fighting for my life. The most damaging testimony came from Rachel Summers, who took the witness stand on the third day looking pale but determined. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and her testimony was devastating. Jason told me that Emily probably wouldn't survive her cancer, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said the doctors were just being optimistic to keep her spirits up, but that realistically, she had maybe a 30% chance of making it. Did Mr. Parker ever discuss financial arrangements in the event of his wife's death? Darius asked. Yes. He told me about the life insurance policy. He said that when Emily died, we would have enough money to start our new life together without any financial stress. Did he ever suggest that he might take actions to hasten his wife's death? Rachel hesitated, looking across the courtroom at Jason for the first time since taking the stand. He talked about how her medications made her so sick, how maybe if she took a little more of the anti-nausea medication, it might help her sleep more peacefully. He said sometimes the kindest thing was to help someone stop suffering. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Jason's attorney looked shocked by this testimony. Miss Summers, did you understand Mr. Parker to be suggesting that he was giving his wife additional medication without her knowledge? I wasn't sure at the time. I thought maybe he was just talking. But now, knowing about the blood work, abnormalities that were discovered later, I think he was telling me what he was actually doing. The defense tried to undermine Rachel's credibility, painting her as a spurned mistress seeking revenge, but her testimony was corroborated by too many other pieces of evidence: the recordings she had made, the financial records, the medical evidence of tampering with my treatment. Jason himself never took the stand. His attorneys clearly decided that his tendency toward manipulation and his inability to take responsibility for his actions would be more damaging than helpful to his case. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of interfering with medical treatment, we find the defendant guilty. I watched Jason's face as each guilty verdict was read. With each guilty, he seemed to shrink further into himself, the reality of his situation finally penetrating the wall of denial and narcissism that had protected him for so long. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month, but given the severity of the charges and Jason's lack of remorse throughout the trial, everyone expected a substantial prison term. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around me, shouting questions about how I felt, what I planned to do next, whether I felt justice had been served. Claire guided me through the crowd to our waiting car, deflecting questions with professional efficiency. How do you feel? She asked once we were safely inside the vehicle. Empty, I said, surprising myself. I thought I'd feel victorious or relieved or something. Instead, I just feel empty. That's normal. You've been fighting for so long, focused on this outcome. Now that it's over, you have to figure out what comes next. What does come next? Civil court to recover the assets Jason stole. Rebuilding your life. Helping your children heal. Moving forward. That evening, I sat down with Noah and Izzy to explain the verdict. We had been following Brian's advice throughout the trial, answering their questions honestly but age-appropriately, helping them understand that their father's choices were not their fault. Daddy was found guilty, I told them. That means the jury believed that he really did the bad things he was accused of doing, so he's going to jail? Noah asked. Yes, probably for a long time, good, Noah said, but his voice was sad rather than angry. I'm glad he can't hurt you anymore. I'm sad, Izzy said simply. I'm sad that Daddy did bad things. It's okay to be sad, I told her, pulling her into my lap. It's okay to feel however you feel about this. Daddy made choices that hurt our family, but that doesn't mean you have to stop loving him or stop feeling sad about what happened. Will we ever see him again? Izzy asked. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday, if you want to and if it's safe. But right now, our job is to take care of each other and build our new life together. Later, after the children were in bed, I walked through my house, truly my house now, with the divorce finalized and Jason's parental rights terminated due to his criminal convictions. The children were safe, financially secure, and beginning to heal from their father's betrayal. Jason would likely spend the next 15 to 20 years in prison. His business partners were suing to recover their stolen funds. Rachel had moved across the country to start over with a new identity, and I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant fear that the man I had trusted most in the world was actively trying to destroy me. Tomorrow, I would begin the next chapter of my life, one where I was in control of my own destiny, where I made my own choices, where my children learned that actions have consequences and that survivors can rebuild from even the worst betrayals. Jason had planned for me to be weak, vulnerable, possibly dead. Instead, I was stronger than I had ever been, armed with the truth and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. He had lost everything in his attempt to take everything from me. I had gained a future that was entirely my own. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my new home office as I sat reviewing case files, a steaming cup of coffee beside me and the familiar sounds of my children getting ready for school echoing from upstairs. 2.5 years had passed since Jason's conviction, and the life I had built from the ashes of our marriage bore no resemblance to the existence I had once known as his wife. The house we lived in now was smaller than our old colonial, but it was entirely mine, purchased with the settlement money recovered from Jason's hidden accounts and chosen specifically for its bright, open spaces and the sense of peace it gave me the moment I walked through the front door. Every piece of furniture, every paint color, every decision about our living space had been made by me alone, creating a sanctuary that reflected my values rather than someone else's vision of what our life should look like. "Mom, have you seen my science project?" Noah called from upstairs, his voice carrying the familiar note of mild panic that accompanied most school mornings for my now 13-year-old son. "Kitchen table, next to your backpack," I called back, smiling at the routine chaos that had become our normal. Noah was thriving in 8th grade, his natural intelligence finally being channeled into academic achievement now that he was no longer carrying the emotional weight of his father's crimes and our family's instability. Izzy appeared in my office doorway, her dark hair neatly braided, and her backpack already slung over her shoulders. At 11, she had developed an efficiency and self-sufficiency that sometimes made her seem older than her years, but she had also maintained the gentle sweetness that made her the heart of our small family. "Are you coming to my volleyball game tonight?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the easy familiarity of someone who knew she was always welcome in my workspace. "I wouldn't miss it," I assured her. "Claire might come too, she's been asking about your season." "Good. I like when Claire comes to things. She cheers really loud." Claire Reynolds had evolved from my attorney to my mentor to one of my closest friends over the past 2 years. Her guidance had been instrumental in my decision to return to law school, and her firm had provided me with a part-time position as a legal assistant while I completed my coursework. More than that, she had shown me what it looked like to be a successful woman who had built her career on her own terms, without compromising her integrity or her values. The decision to return to law school had not been easy. For months after Jason's conviction, I had been content to focus solely on my children's healing and our day-to-day life together. The trauma of the trial, the media attention, and the complex process of helping Noah and Izzy understand their father's crimes had left me exhausted and uncertain about what came next. It was Claire who had first suggested that I consider using my experience to help other women in similar situations. "Emily," she had said during one of our regular coffee meetings, "you have insights into this kind of manipulation that law school can't teach. You understand how these cases work from the inside, how the psychological manipulation develops, how the financial abuse escalates. That knowledge could make a real difference for other victims." The idea had initially felt overwhelming. I was still processing my own trauma, still helping my children navigate their complex feelings about their father's imprisonment. The thought of immersing myself in other people's similar traumas had seemed like too much to handle, but as the months passed and I began to feel more stable in our new life, I found myself increasingly drawn to the possibility of turning my survival into something that could help others. I started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, offering support to women who were trying to leave abusive relationships. I began reading about legal advocacy for victims of financial abuse and medical manipulation. Slowly, I realized that returning to law school wasn't just about building a career, it was about finding a way to make meaning from the worst experience of my life. The application process had been daunting. I had been out of legal practice for over a decade, and the law had evolved significantly during my years as a full-time mother. But my undergraduate grades had been strong, my LES scores were competitive, and my personal statement detailing my experience as a victim of the crimes I hoped to prosecute had apparently made an impression on the admissions committee. I had been accepted to 3 programs and had chosen the evening law program at the state university, which allowed me to maintain my schedule with the children while making progress toward my GD. The coursework was challenging but invigorating, awakening parts of my mind that had been dormant during my years of focusing solely on family life. "Mom," Noah appeared beside Izzy, his science project safely in hand and his expression thoughtful in the way that usually indicated he had been processing something important. "I've been thinking about Dad again." I set down my coffee cup and gave him my full attention. Noah's relationship with his father's memory and imprisonment was complex and evolving. Some days he was angry, some days he was sad, and some days he seemed to have achieved a philosophical acceptance that impressed me with its maturity. "What kind of thoughts?" I asked gently. "I was wondering if he knows about your law school and the work you're doing with other families." "I don't know, sweetheart." "Why?" "I think he'd be proud of you," Noah said simply. "Even though he did terrible things, I think he'd be proud that you're helping people." The observation was so unexpectedly generous that it took me a moment to respond. Noah's ability to separate his father's crimes from his father's capacity for human emotion continued to surprise me. It spoke to a level of emotional intelligence and forgiveness that I was still working to develop myself. "That's a very kind way to think about it," I said. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel like it's okay to think Dad might be proud of you, but it doesn't change anything about what he did or why he's in prison. You're not doing this work for him, you're doing it for the people who need help now." Izzy nodded in agreement. "And for us too, because it makes you happy, and when you're happy, we're happy." After the children left for school, I returned to my case files with a renewed sense of purpose. I was currently working on 3 different cases through Claire's firm, all involving various forms of domestic abuse that included financial manipulation or medical interference. The first case involved a woman whose husband had been slowly poisoning her with small doses of arsenic, creating symptoms that mimicked a degenerative neurological condition. The second concerned a man who had been forging his wife's signature on loan documents, destroying her credit and leaving her financially trapped in their marriage. The third case was perhaps the most complex, a woman whose husband, a doctor, had been prescribing unnecessary medications and procedures, both billing her insurance fraudulently and keeping her in a state of chronic illness that made her dependent on his care. Each case required different legal strategies, different types of evidence, and different approaches to supporting the victim through the process of seeking justice. But they all shared common elements that I recognized from my own experience: the gradual erosion of the victim's autonomy, the manipulation of trust and care, and the devastating realization that the person who claimed to love them had been systematically destroying their life. My phone rang, interrupting my review of medical records for the arsenic poisoning case. The caller ID showed the number for Dr. Martinez, my oncologist, who I still saw every 6 months for follow-up appointments. "Emily, I hope I'm not calling too early," he said when I answered. "I wanted to follow up on something we discussed during your last appointment." "Of course, Dr. Martinez. What can I do for you?" "I've been thinking about your suggestion that I speak to medical students about recognizing signs of treatment interference in cancer patients. I'd like to move forward with that, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to participate, perhaps speak about the patient's perspective on this issue." The request both honored and intimidated me. Dr. Martinez had been one of the first people to take seriously the possibility that Jason had been interfering with my treatment, and his support had been crucial during the investigation that led to Jason's conviction. But the thought of speaking publicly about my experience still felt daunting. What would be involved? I asked. "A presentation to our third-year medical students, maybe 30 minutes on recognizing the signs of treatment sabotage and supporting patients who may be experiencing it. Your perspective on what it felt like to be a patient in that situation would be invaluable for their training." I thought about the young doctors who would soon be treating cancer patients, some of whom might be facing the same kind of betrayal I had experienced. If my story could help them recognize the signs earlier, support their patients more effectively, or simply understand the complexity of abuse within intimate relationships, then the discomfort of sharing my experience would be worthwhile. "Yes," I said, "I'll do it." "Excellent. I'll have my assistant coordinate with you on scheduling." "Emily, what you went through was terrible, but the way you've channeled that experience into helping others is truly inspiring." After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on how far I had come from the terrified cancer patient who had discovered her husband's betrayal. That woman had been focused solely on survival, her own and her children's. This woman was able to use that survival to create opportunities for other people to escape similar situations. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, periods when the trauma felt overwhelming and the future seemed uncertain. Therapy with Brian had been essential, helping me process not just the betrayal itself but the complex guilt and self-blame that came with realizing I had been so thoroughly deceived by someone I loved. The children had needed their own support as well. Noah had struggled with anger management during the first year after Jason's conviction, needing help to channel his rage about his father's crimes in healthy ways. Izzy had gone through a period of intense anxiety about my health, requiring constant reassurance that I was truly cancer-free and that no one was interfering with my medical care. But we had all done the work individually and as a family to heal from what Jason had done to us. We had built new traditions, new routines, new ways of being together that weren't shadowed by his manipulation and control. We had learned to trust our own perceptions, to communicate openly about our feelings, and to support each other through the ongoing process of recovery. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The message was from the admissions office at the law school, informing me that I had been selected for the law review based on my first-year grades. The honor was both exciting and validating confirmation that my decision to return to law school had been the right one, that I was capable of academic success despite the years away from formal education. I forwarded the email to Claire, who responded immediately with a phone call. "Emily, this is incredible news," she said without preamble. "Law review is a huge honor, and it will open so many doors for your career." "I'm still processing it," I admitted. "A year ago, I wasn't sure I was smart enough to handle law school coursework after so many years away from academia." "You're not just smart enough, you're exceptional. Your combination of academic ability, real-world experience, and genuine passion for justice is exactly what the legal profession needs." Speaking of which, have you heard anything about the Mitchell case? The Mitchell case was our most recent client, a woman whose husband had been tampering with her insulin pump while she slept, causing dangerous blood sugar fluctuations that had led to several emergency room visits. The case was particularly challenging because the husband was a software engineer who had sophisticated knowledge of medical devices and had been careful to avoid leaving obvious evidence of his interference. "Actually, yes," the prosecutor called. "This morning, they found digital evidence on his computer logs showing that he had been accessing her pump's programming remotely. It's enough for charges, thank God." "How is Sarah handling the news?" "Relief, mostly. She's been doubting herself for months, wondering if she was imagining the connection between her symptoms and her husband's behavior. Having official validation that she was right, that her perceptions were accurate, is incredibly important for her recovery." I understood that relief intimately. One of the most insidious aspects of the kind of abuse Jason had perpetrated was the way it made victims question their own reality. When the person you trust most in the world is systematically lying to you, manipulating your environment, and gaslighting you about your own experiences, it becomes almost impossible to trust your own perceptions. The validation that came with official recognition of the abuse through criminal charges, civil court victories, or simply acknowledgement from professionals who understood these dynamics was often a crucial step in the victim's healing process. "I'll call Sarah this afternoon," I said. "She'll probably want to talk through what happens next. She's lucky to have you working on her case." "Emily, the way you connect with these clients, the trust they have in you because of your shared experience, it's making a real difference in their outcomes." After hanging up with Claire, I spent the rest of the morning reviewing precedents for medical device tampering cases, preparing for the legal challenges that Sarah's case would present. The law in this area was still evolving, as technology created new opportunities for intimate partner abuse that legislators and courts were only beginning to understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian, the counselor who had been instrumental in helping our family heal. "Lunch today? I have something exciting to share." I texted back, "Absolutely." "Noon at the usual place?" Brian and I had maintained a friendship beyond our therapeutic relationship, bonded by shared interest in helping families recover from complex trauma. He had become something of a mentor as I prepared for my new career, offering insights into the psychological aspects of the cases I was working on. The restaurant where we met was a small cafe near the courthouse, popular with lawyers and social workers who appreciated its quiet atmosphere and reliable Wi-Fi. Brian was already seated when I arrived, his warm smile and calm demeanor as comforting as ever. "You look energized," he observed as I sat down across from him. "Law school is agreeing with you. It really is. I just found out I made law review." "Actually, Emily, that's wonderful. You should be incredibly proud of yourself." I am, though it still feels a bit surreal. 2 years ago, I was barely functioning, just trying to get through each day. Now I'm succeeding academically and building a career I'm passionate about. That transformation didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without tremendous effort. On your part, you've done the work to heal, to rebuild, to find meaning in your survival. What's your exciting news? I asked, deflecting the praise in the way that had become habitual. Though I was slowly learning to accept compliments more gracefully, I've been invited to present at a national conference on intimate partner violence. The focus is on the intersection of domestic abuse and medical manipulation, an area where research is really expanding rapidly. That's incredible, Brian. Your work in this area has been so important. Actually, that's where you come in. I'd like you to co-present with me. The conference organizers are specifically looking for presentations that include survivor perspectives, alongside clinical insights. The invitation was both flattering and intimidating. Speaking at a national conference would be a significant step in establishing myself as an expert in this field, but it would also mean sharing my story with a much larger audience than I had previously considered. What would my role be? I'd present the clinical framework for understanding medical manipulation in intimate relationships, and you'd speak about the victim's experience, how this type of abuse develops, how it feels from the inside, what barriers victims face in recognizing and reporting it. I thought about all the women I had worked with over the past year, all the stories I had heard that echoed my own experience in heartbreaking ways. If speaking at this conference could help more professionals recognize these patterns, support victims more effectively, or prevent other women from enduring what I had endured, then my discomfort about public speaking was irrelevant. Yes, I said, I'll do it. Excellent. Emily, your voice in this field is becoming increasingly important. The legal advocacy you're doing, the cases you're helping to build, the perspective you bring to these issues, it's making a real difference. That evening, I sat in the bleachers at Izzy's volleyball game, cheering enthusiastically as my daughter spiked the ball with surprising force for someone her size. Claire had indeed come to the game, and she was living up to her reputation for loud cheering, shouting encouragement that made other parents smile and Izzy beam with pride. She's really improved this season, Claire observed during a timeout. Remember when she first started playing and was afraid the ball would hurt her? Now she's the one making other players afraid, I said with maternal pride. She's developed this fierce competitive streak that surprises everyone. I wonder where she gets that from, Claire said with a knowing smile. After the game, which Izzy's team won in a thrilling 3-set match, we went out for ice cream to celebrate. The kids were animated, rehashing every play and planning strategy for the upcoming tournament. I watched them with the deep contentment that came from seeing my children happy, confident, and free from the shadow of their father's crimes. Mom, Noah said between bites of chocolate chip cookie dough, I've been thinking about the presentation you're doing with Dr. Martinez. What about it? I think it's really cool that you're teaching doctors about this stuff. Maybe some of them will have patients like you were, and they'll know how to help them because of what you tell them. That's exactly what I hope will happen, I said. And the conference with Brian too, Izzy added. You're becoming famous for helping people. Not famous exactly, but I am becoming known in this field, which means more opportunities to help families like ours. Are you going to write a book? Noah asked suddenly. Like, about what happened to us and how we got through it. The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on my legal career and direct advocacy work that I hadn't considered the possibility of sharing our story in written form. Would you be okay with that? I asked. It would mean writing about very personal things that happened to our family. Both children considered this seriously. I think it would be good, Izzy said. Finally. Because there might be other kids whose parents are lying to them, and they could read it and know they're not alone. And it would show that families can be okay after really bad things happen, Noah added. Like, we're happy now, even though Dad did those terrible things. Other families could be happy too. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of our family's trauma and their generous desire to help other children in similar situations continued to amaze me. They had inherited none of their father's narcissism or manipulation, instead developing empathy, resilience, and a strong sense of justice that made me proud every day. I'll think about it, I promised them. Maybe after I finish law school and get more established in my career. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat in my office reviewing the materials for my upcoming presentations and thinking about the book idea. There were already memoirs about surviving intimate partner violence, but fewer that specifically addressed medical manipulation or that included the perspective of children who had witnessed their father's attempted murder of their mother. A book could reach people who would never attend a legal conference or a medical training seminar. It could provide validation for victims who were still trapped in similar situations, hope for those who were in the early stages of recovery, and education for family members, friends, and professionals who wanted to understand these dynamics better. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing, not with the intention of writing a book immediately, but simply to capture my thoughts about what such a project might include. The first sign wasn't the affair. It wasn't the hidden money or the late nights at the office, or even the gradual emotional distance that developed during my cancer treatment. The first sign was something much more subtle: the way Jason began to take control of my medical care, positioning himself as the expert on my condition and the gatekeeper of my relationship with my doctors. I wrote for an hour, the words flowing more easily than I had expected. There was something therapeutic about putting our story into narrative form, about creating a coherent account of what had happened to us and how we had survived it. When I finally stopped writing, I had several pages of notes and the beginning of what could eventually become a book proposal. The project felt both exciting and daunting, but it also felt like a natural extension of the advocacy work I was already doing. My phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I felt the familiar spike of anxiety that still accompanied unexpected communications, a lingering effect of the months when Jason's harassment had made me wary of any contact from strangers. But when I opened the message, I realized it was from Sarah Mitchell, the client whose husband had been tampering with her insulin pump. Emily, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me. The prosecutor says they have enough evidence for charges, and I finally feel like people believe me. I know this is just the beginning of the legal process, but for the first time in months, I feel hopeful about the future. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to survive this and build something better. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that my work had made a real difference in someone's life. Sarah would face challenges ahead: the trial, the divorce proceedings, the ongoing process of rebuilding her life, but she now had the tools and support she needed to navigate those challenges successfully. This was why I had returned to law school, why I had chosen to specialize in these difficult cases, why I was willing to share my story publicly despite the discomfort it sometimes caused. Not for revenge against Jason or validation of my own experience, but for the opportunity to help other women escape the traps that had nearly destroyed me. I responded to Sarah's text, "You're so welcome. You were incredibly brave to trust your instincts and seek help. I'm proud of you for fighting for yourself, and I'll be here to support you through whatever comes next." Before going to bed, I checked on both children, a nightly ritual that had become even more important to me since Jason's conviction. Noah was sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed in a way that it hadn't been during the worst months of our family crisis. Izzy was curled up with the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was a baby, looking young and innocent despite the maturity she'd shown in processing our family's trauma. These were the people I had been fighting for during the darkest days of my marriage, not just my own survival, but their safety, their stability, their right to grow up in a home free from manipulation and control. Looking at them now, healthy and happy and secure in our new life, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with law school honors or career achievements. I had saved them. I had saved myself. And now I was in a position to help save others. The future stretched ahead of us, full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. Law school graduation in 18 months, establishing my own practice, the conference presentations, possibly a book, and countless opportunities to use my experience to make a difference for other families. Jason had tried to destroy us, and instead he had forged us into something stronger than we had ever been before. We were no longer just survivors of his crimes, we were advocates, fighters, people who used our survival to create safety for others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to seek justice for people who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. But tonight, in our safe, warm house, surrounded by the life I had built through sheer determination and the support of people who valued my well-being over their own convenience, I was simply grateful. Grateful to be alive, grateful to be free. and grateful to have found a way to make meaning from the worst experience of my life. 5 years after Jason's conviction, I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 12, adjusting the burgundy blazer I had chosen for what would be my first jury trial as lead counsel. The case that had brought me here represented everything I had worked toward since returning to law school: a complex medical manipulation case with a vulnerable victim, a manipulative defendant, and the opportunity to set legal precedent that could protect other families facing similar abuse. My client, Maria Santos, waited beside me with the quiet composure that I had learned to recognize in survivors of intimate partner violence. Her husband, Dr. Ricardo Santos, had been systematically poisoning her with unnecessary chemotherapy drugs, convincing her that she had cancer, while billing her insurance for fraudulent treatments. The case had taken 2 years to build, requiring cooperation between medical experts, forensic accountants, and criminal investigators to unravel the sophisticated deception Ricardo had constructed. "Are you ready for this?" I asked Maria, though I could see from her expression that she had been ready for this moment since the day she discovered the truth about her husband's manipulation. "I've been ready for 3 years," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were about to face. "Ever since I realized that Ricardo had been making me sick on purpose, I've been waiting for the chance to hold him accountable." Claire appeared beside us, carrying the case files and wearing the confident expression that had become familiar to me during our years of partnership. She had made me lead counsel on this case as part of my preparation for establishing my own practice, but she remained as my co-counsel and advisor, ensuring that Maria received the benefit of both our combined experience. The defense filed another motion this morning, Claire informed us. "Standard delay tactic." Judge Wilson denied it without discussion. "Good," I said, feeling the familiar surge of determination that had carried me through my own legal battles and dozens of cases since then. "Ricardo Santos is about to learn that his medical degree doesn't make him above the law." We entered the courtroom together, taking our seats at the plaintiff's table. The gallery was filled with Maria's supporters, family members, friends from her church, and several other women who had reached out to us during the pretrial period after reading about the case in local news coverage. What had started as one woman's quest for justice had become a symbol of the broader issue of medical manipulation in intimate relationships. In the back row, I spotted my children sitting with my mother, who had become a regular presence at my important court appearances. Noah, now 16 and taller than me, gave me a subtle thumbs up. Izzy, 14 and already showing signs of the strong woman she would become, mouthed good luck with a smile that reminded me why I fought so hard for families facing what we had endured. Judge Wilson called the court to order, and I rose to deliver my opening statement. The words I had practiced dozens of times felt different now, weighted with the knowledge that they represented not just Maria's story, but the growing recognition that medical abuse was a serious crime that required serious consequences. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, 3 years ago Maria Santos was dying, not from cancer, as she believed, but from chemotherapy drugs that were being administered to her by someone she trusted completely: her husband, Dr. Ricardo Santos, who had convinced her that she had a rare form of leukemia that required aggressive treatment. I walked them through Maria's story, the gradual onset of symptoms that had seemed to indicate serious illness, Ricardo's insistence that she see him for treatment rather than seeking outside medical opinions, the increasing isolation from family and friends as her health deteriorated, and finally, the discovery that her blood work had been falsified and her treatments had been completely unnecessary. The defendant will try to convince you that his actions were motivated by love, by a sincere but misguided belief that his wife needed medical intervention. But the evidence will show that Dr. Santos' actions were motivated by greed, the desire to collect insurance payments for fraudulent treatments, and by control, the need to maintain dominance over a wife who was beginning to question his authority in their marriage. As I spoke, I was aware of Maria watching me with trust and gratitude, of my children beaming with pride at seeing their mother in her professional element, of Claire nodding approval at my delivery. But I was also aware of my own journey, from the terrified cancer patient who had discovered her husband's betrayal to the confident attorney who could now stand before a jury and demand justice for others. At the conclusion of this trial, I continued, I will ask you to hold Dr. Santos accountable for his crimes against his wife, against the medical profession he has dishonored, and against the basic human right to receive honest medical care. from those we trust. Maria Santos survived her husband's attempts to destroy her health and her life, but she should not have to bear the costs of that survival alone. The trial lasted 8 days. We presented medical experts who testified about the effects of unnecessary chemotherapy on a healthy person. We showed financial records demonstrating Ricardo's mounting gambling debts and his increasing reliance on insurance fraud to maintain his lifestyle. We played recordings Maria had made once she became suspicious of her husband's behavior, conversations where Ricardo could be heard dismissing her concerns about seeking second opinions and insisting that he knew better than any other doctor how to treat her condition. Ricardo's defense team employed tactics that had become depressingly familiar to me, portraying their client as a devoted husband who had genuinely believed his wife was ill, suggesting that Maria's accusations were motivated by spite over their failing marriage rather than evidence. But the parallels to other medical manipulation cases were clear, and I was able to anticipate and counter their arguments with the hard-won knowledge of how this type of abuse actually operates. Dr. Santos, I said during my cross-examination of the defendant, you've testified that you genuinely believed your wife had cancer. Can you explain why you never referred her to an oncologist for confirmation of this diagnosis? I am a qualified physician, Ricardo replied, his arrogance evident even as he sat in the defendant's chair. I was perfectly capable of diagnosing and treating my wife's condition. But oncology is not your specialty, is it, Dr. Santos? No. But I have extensive medical training, Dr. Santos. According to your medical school transcripts, you received a C- in your oncology rotation and were noted by your supervising physician as having significant gaps in understanding of cancer diagnosis and treatment. Doesn't that suggest you should have sought specialized consultation for your wife's alleged cancer? Ricardo's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury could see that his claim of medical expertise was as fabricated as his wife's cancer diagnosis. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Jennifer Reyes, the oncologist who had examined Maria after she escaped from Ricardo's control. Dr. Reyes had been my own oncologist's colleague, and her testimony was both medically precise and emotionally compelling. Mrs. Santos had no signs of cancer, Dr. Reyes explained to the jury. Her blood work was completely normal. Her bone marrow biopsy was negative, and her physical examination showed no evidence of malignancy. However, she did show clear signs of chemotherapy toxicity, hair loss, nausea, suppressed immune function, and cellular damage consistent with unnecessary exposure to cytotoxic drugs. In your medical opinion, Dr. Reyes, could Mrs. Santos have developed cancer without her husband detecting it during his alleged treatment? Absolutely not. The type of leukemia Dr. Santos claimed to be treating would have been immediately apparent in blood work and physical examination. There is no medical scenario in which Mrs. Santos could have had this condition without clear objective evidence. The defense tried to undermine Dr. Reyes' credibility by suggesting that she was biased against Dr. Santos, but her credentials were impeccable and her testimony was corroborated by multiple other medical experts. On the final day of testimony, Maria took the stand to tell her story in her own words. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity and clarity. I trusted Ricardo completely, Maria said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. When he told me I had cancer, I was terrified, but I was also grateful that my husband was a doctor who could take care of me. I never questioned his diagnosis or his treatment plan because I believed he loved me and would never hurt me. When did you first begin to suspect that something was wrong? I asked during my direct examination, when I started to get better. After leaving him, Maria replied. Within weeks of moving out of our house and stopping the treatments, I began to feel stronger. My hair started growing back, my appetite returned, and I had energy I hadn't felt in months. That's when I realized that Ricardo's treatments had been making me sick, not making me better. How do you feel about your husband now? Maria looked across the courtroom at Ricardo, who was staring at the table in front of him, unable to meet her eyes. I feel sorry for him, she said. I feel sorry that he was so consumed by his own problems that he was willing to destroy my health to solve them. But I also feel angry that he stole months of my life, angry that he made me afraid I was going to die, angry that he used my love and trust as weapons against me. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a verdict in Maria's favor, awarding her $3.2 million in damages, enough to cover her medical expenses, lost wages, and the emotional trauma of her husband's betrayal. More importantly, the verdict established legal precedent that medical manipulation by intimate partners would be treated as seriously as any other form of domestic violence. Outside the courthouse, Maria and I were surrounded by reporters asking about the case and its implications for other victims of medical abuse. I answered their questions with the confidence that had become second nature after years of advocating for these cases. This verdict sends a clear message that medical professionals who abuse their knowledge and authority to harm their intimate partners will be held accountable, I told the assembled media. Too many victims of this type of abuse suffer in silence because they don't realize that what's happening to them is a crime, or because they don't think anyone will believe them. Today's verdict shows that the legal system will support victims who have the courage to come forward. What's next for your practice? One reporter asked. I'm opening my own firm next month, specializing in cases involving medical manipulation, financial abuse, and other forms of intimate partner violence that are often overlooked by traditional domestic violence services, I said. There are too many people suffering from these hidden forms of abuse, and they deserve advocates who understand the complexity of what they're experiencing. That evening, I celebrated with my children, Claire, and several other friends at the restaurant, where I had first discussed returning to legal practice 5 years earlier. The circular nature of the moment wasn't lost on me. From desperate client to successful attorney, from victim to advocate, from survivor to someone who could help create other survivors. I'm proud of you, Mom, Noah said, raising his glass of soda in a toast. You took the worst thing that ever happened to our family and turned it into a way to help other families. We all did, I corrected him. We all survived what happened to us, and we all found ways to make it meaningful. Izzy, now 14 and wise beyond her years, added her own perspective. I love that you help people who are scared and confused like we were. It makes Dad's crimes feel less horrible, because now other families can be safe. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the children were in bed, I sat in my home office reviewing the paperwork for my new law firm. Parker and Associates would officially open its doors in 3 weeks, operating out of a small but elegant office space downtown that I had chosen specifically for its proximity to the courthouse and its warm, welcoming atmosphere that would make traumatized clients feel safe. The name had been a conscious choice. I had considered reverting to my maiden name after the divorce, but ultimately decided to keep Jason's name as a reminder of what I had survived and a symbol of how I had reclaimed my life from his attempts to destroy it. Noah and Izzy were Parker's too, and I wanted our shared name to represent resilience rather than victimization. My phone buzzed with a text message that made me smile. It was from Dr. Martinez. Saw the news coverage of your victory today. Your father would be incredibly proud of the woman you've become. Looking forward to our medical school presentation next month. Dr. Martinez had become one of my strongest professional allies over the years, regularly referring patients who showed signs of medical manipulation and serving as an expert witness in several of my cases. Our upcoming presentation to medical students had expanded into a comprehensive training program that was being implemented at hospitals throughout the state. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the materials for 3 new cases that had been referred to me in the wake of the publicity surrounding Maria's trial. Each file told a story that was both unique and heartbreakingly familiar. Women who had trusted someone who was systematically destroying their health, finances, or both, using love and concern as camouflage for abuse and control. The first case involved a nurse whose doctor husband had been prescribing her unnecessary psychiatric medications, convincing her that she was developing early-onset dementia while planning to have her declared incompetent so he could control her inheritance. The second concerned a woman whose pharmacist boyfriend had been substituting placebos for her heart medication, causing her to have several cardiac episodes that he then heroically treated, positioning himself as her savior while actually being her would-be killer. The third case was perhaps the most complex, a woman whose veterinarian husband had been using animal sedatives to drug her food, making her appear to have a mysterious sleeping disorder while he conducted an affair with his practice partner. Each case would require different legal strategies, different types of evidence, and different approaches to supporting the victim through the process of seeking justice. But they all shared the common elements I had learned to recognize: the gradual erosion of the victim's autonomy, the manipulation of trust and professional expertise, and the devastating realization that the person who claimed to love them had been systematically destroying their life. As I made notes on potential expert witnesses and legal theories for each case, I thought about the woman I had been 5 years ago, terrified, confused, doubting my own perceptions because the person I trusted most in the world was systematically lying to me. That woman could never have imagined sitting in a home office she owned completely, reviewing cases as a successful attorney, planning presentations to medical professionals, and building a practice dedicated to helping other families escape similar traps. My phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I felt the familiar spike of caution that still accompanied unexpected calls, a lingering effect of the months when Jason's harassment had made me wary of any contact from strangers. Emily Parker speaking, I answered. Miss Parker, this is Jennifer Walsh from the National Domestic Violence Legal Initiative. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. How can I help you? We've been following your work in medical manipulation cases, and we'd like to invite you to join our advisory board. We're developing new training protocols for attorneys who work with intimate partner violence cases, and we believe your expertise would be invaluable. The invitation was both flattering and significant. The National Domestic Violence Legal Initiative was the most respected organization in the field, and serving on their advisory board would provide a platform to influence policy and training on a national level. I'd be honored to participate, I said. What would be involved? Quarterly meetings, input on training materials, and perhaps some speaking engagements at our annual conference. We're particularly interested in your insights on medical manipulation, which is becoming an increasingly recognized form of abuse, but remains poorly understood by many legal professionals. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on how far I had come from the days when I could barely function, focused solely on day-to-day survival. The invitation to join a national advisory board was validation that my work was making a difference beyond individual cases, contributing to broader understanding of these complex forms of abuse. I walked through my house, checking locks and security systems in the routine that had become second nature over the years. The physical threats were long over. Jason was still in prison and would remain there for many more years, but the habits of vigilance had become part of my new normal, a small price to pay for the peace of mind that came with taking my safety seriously. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept Jason's letters from prison. There had been fewer over the past year, and their tone had evolved from the desperate manipulations of his early incarceration to what seemed like genuine attempts at accountability. The most recent letter, which had arrived weeks ago, was different from anything he had written before. Emily, it began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you choose not to read this. I've been in therapy for almost 3 years now, working with a psychologist who specializes in helping people understand and take responsibility for the harm they've caused to others. For the first time, I think I'm beginning to truly comprehend the magnitude of what I did to you and our children. The letter continued for several pages, detailing his growing understanding of how his actions had affected me, how his crimes had traumatized Noah and Izzy, and how his behavior had represented not just legal violations, but fundamental betrayals of everything marriage and family were supposed to represent. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. I don't even think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now that everything that happened was my choice, my responsibility, and my fault. You deserve so much better than what I gave. You and our children deserved a father who protected their mother instead of trying to destroy her. I'm grateful every day that you survived, that you found the strength to expose my crimes, and that you've built a life that makes you happy. The work you're doing to help other families, I read about it in the newspapers sometimes, is exactly what the world needs. You've taken the worst thing I ever did and turned it into something that protects other people. That's who you really are, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. The letter had surprised me with its apparent sincerity and insight, so different from his earlier communications full of self-justification and manipulation. But it hadn't changed anything fundamental about my situation or my feelings. Jason was still in prison, still facing many more years of incarceration. I was still building a life that didn't include him, still helping my children process their complicated feelings about their father's crimes. More importantly, I no longer needed his acknowledgement or his apologies to feel whole. The validation I had once craved from him, recognition of what he had done, acceptance of responsibility, genuine remorse no longer seemed essential to my recovery. I had found my own sources of validation in my work, my relationships, and My daily experience of living a life free from manipulation and control. I closed the drawer without responding to the letter, as I had with all the others. There might come a time when communication with Jason would be appropriate or necessary, perhaps if our children decided they wanted to explore a relationship with their father as adults. But for now, my energy was better spent on the future than on relitigating the past. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The message was from Maria Santos, my client, whose victory we had celebrated that evening. Emily, she wrote, I can't find adequate words to thank you for everything you've done for me. When I first came to your office 2 years ago, I was broken, confused, and afraid that no one would believe my story. You not only believed me, you helped me understand that what happened to me was not my fault, that Ricardo's crimes were his choices, and that I deserved justice. Today's verdict wasn't just about money or legal precedent. It was about validation, about being heard, about having someone with authority say that what Ricardo did to me was wrong and that I didn't deserve it. You gave me back my voice, my confidence, and my belief that I could build a better future. I know you have many other clients who need your help, but I wanted you to know that you literally saved my life. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from knowing my work had made a fundamental difference in someone's life. Maria would face challenges ahead, rebuilding her health, navigating the ongoing divorce proceedings, establishing her independence after years of control, but she now had the tools, support, and confidence she needed to handle those challenges successfully. This was why I had returned to law school, why I had chosen to specialize in these difficult cases, why I was willing to share my story publicly despite the discomfort it sometimes caused. Not for revenge against Jason or validation of my own experience, but for the opportunity to help other women escape the traps that had nearly destroyed me. I responded to Maria's email. You were incredibly brave to trust your instincts, seek help, and persist through a difficult legal process. The strength you showed throughout this case was inspiring to everyone who worked with you. I'm honored to have been part of your journey to justice, and I'll be here to support you as you continue building your new life. Before heading to bed, I reviewed my calendar for the coming weeks. Tomorrow I had a consultation with a potential new client, a teacher whose principal husband had been drugging her coffee with Adderall to make her appear hyperactive and unstable at work. Thursday, I would be meeting with prosecutors about the veterinarian case, discussing strategy for proving that animal sedatives had been used on a human victim. Next week I had 3 court appearances, a deposition, and the presentation to medical students that Dr. Martinez and I had been developing. The schedule was demanding, but it was the kind of demanding that energized rather than depleted me. Every case represented an opportunity to seek justice for someone who had been betrayed by the person they trusted most. Every presentation was a chance to educate professionals who might encounter similar cases in the future. Every victory in court established precedents that would make it easier for the next victim to seek justice. I thought about the book project I had been working on in spare moments over the past year, a memoir that told our family's story while also serving as a guide for other survivors of medical manipulation and complex domestic abuse. The manuscript was nearly complete, and I had been approached by several publishers who were interested in bringing it to a wider audience. The book would represent another way to help people who were trapped in situations like the one I had survived. It would provide validation for victims who were questioning their own perceptions, hope for those who were in the early stages of recovery, and education for family members, friends, and professionals who wanted to understand these dynamics better. Most importantly, it would show that survival was possible, that families could heal from even the most devastating betrayals, and that trauma could be transformed into purpose. As I prepared for bed, I performed my nightly ritual of checking on both children. Noah's room was filled with college brochures and SAT prep books. He was a junior now, already thinking about his future with the kind of focused determination that reminded me of myself at his age. His experiences had shaped him into someone who valued honesty, justice, and the protection of vulnerable people. I suspected he might follow me into law, though he was also considering medicine and social work. Izzy's room reflected her artistic interests. Easels, sketchbooks, and paintings covered every available surface. She had channeled her experiences into visual art, creating pieces that expressed complex emotions about family, trust, and healing. Her art teacher had encouraged her to submit work to national competitions, recognizing a talent that had been nurtured by her need to process Trauma creatively. Both children had grown into remarkable young people despite or perhaps because of what they had endured. They were empathetic without being naive, strong without being hard, and committed to using their experiences to help others without being defined by their trauma. Looking at them sleeping peacefully in the home I had created for us, I felt the profound satisfaction that came from knowing I had not only survived Jason's attempts to destroy our family, but had built something better from the wreckage of our old life. In my own bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept a small frame photo from my last day of chemotherapy 6 years ago. In the picture, I was bald, pale, and wearing a hospital gown, but I was smiling with genuine joy at having completed my treatment. It served as a daily reminder of how far I had come, how much I had survived, and why I never wanted to be that vulnerable again. Beside, it was a newer photo, one taken after my law school graduation, with Noah and Izzy on either side of me, all of us beaming with pride and happiness. That photo represented the life I had built through determination, hard work, and the support of people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to seek justice for people who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. Next month I would open my own practice, officially establishing myself as an advocate for victims of the kinds of crimes Jason had committed against me. Next year I would expand my work to include training programs for medical professionals, legal education seminars, and possibly a foundation dedicated to supporting survivors of medical manipulation. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I was still discovering. Jason had tried to end my story with my death, leaving him free to build a new life with his mistress using my life insurance money. Instead, he had created the beginning of a story about survival, justice, and the power of transforming trauma into purpose. I was no longer the frightened cancer patient who had discovered her husband's betrayal. I was no longer the desperate mother fighting for her children's safety and her own survival. I was someone who had not only survived the worst that love could become when it was corrupted by greed and control, but had transformed that survival into a career dedicated to protecting other families from similar betrayals. Jason had spent months planning my destruction, and instead he had forged me into someone capable of helping other women escape the traps he had tried to set for me. He had intended to make me a victim, and instead he had created an advocate. I turned off the lights, set my alarm for another busy day of fighting for justice, and went to sleep in the bedroom of a house I owned, completely, in a life I had built entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued my well-being and respected my strength. I had reclaimed everything Jason had tried to take from me: my health, my children, my financial security, my sense of self-worth, my ability to trust my own perceptions. But more than that, I had claimed something he could never have imagined: the power to help others reclaim their own lives from similar betrayals. The future was mine to write, and I was excited to see what new chapters it would hold. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.